One of the new difficulties that we'll face with Phase 2 of Writing Project 1 is the fact that as a part of this new writing task, we have to incorporate an outside source into our writing. Specifically, I've asked you to incorporate Cited by Barbara Ehrenreich. This is something that we haven't done yet, and what we'll find as we start working with an outside source is that there are a number of small problems that we run into that we just have to deal with as a part of writing about somebody else's ideas. Let me show you what I mean. This is page 56 of Cited. Imagine that I'm writing a paper about being a negative person in a positive world and how difficult it is to succeed with what one might call a negative attitude. I might see this part of the chapter and think that it's really relevant to what I'm trying to say. In the world of positive thinking, other people are not there to be nurtured or to provide unwelcome reality checks. They are only there to nourish, praise, and affirm. That might fit very neatly with what I'm trying to say at this point. So let's imagine that I try to bring that over into my writing. Imagine this is my paper. Oh, hang on a second. Part of that isn't mine. The quotation that we just saw from Cited is right there in the middle of my paper. Even though we haven't talked a great deal about incorporating outside sources, we should all recognize that this is not okay. We can't just take other people's writing and drop it into our own. So we've got a problem. This doesn't work. Just sort of plopping in a quotation there doesn't work in college writing, in part because it leaves a lot of questions. When I'm encountering a new idea as a reader, I have to figure out, first of all, whose idea is this? Is this something that the writer is saying, or is this something that they're taking from a source? If I realize that this is an idea that's coming from an outside source, I need to know where it came from. Where did this idea originate? And if it's something that I want to follow up on or that I'm confused about, if I'm not sure that I agree with the idea, or if I think maybe the writer is misunderstanding it, I might also want to actually track down the source itself. I might wonder where I can find the original version. These are all things that readers need to be able to know as they're encountering ideas from an outside source in your writing. And as you can imagine, there are a million different ways that we could communicate those ideas. There are lots and lots of ways to explain whose idea something is, to point out where it comes from, and to point out where it can be found. This is why we're talking about MLA style today. All of these problems face every writer who's working with someone else's ideas, which is to say, pretty much every writer. And in every discipline, the answers that they have to these questions are a little bit different. The way that we present this information changes depending on the audience that we're writing for and the subject matter that we're writing about. The rules for how to solve this problem are contained in something called citation styles. Citation styles are systems of rules that explain exactly how one should identify the source of information, how one should format quotations, how one should provide citations explaining where things come from. There are lots and lots of different sets of rules about this. MLA style is the citation style that we'll be using in this class, and it's one of many. So let's take a look at two different citation styles, APA and MLA, so you can see what kinds of differences I'm talking about. We're using MLA style in our class, but I want to look at this comparison because at some point in your academic career, you're going to have to write a paper using APA style. Both of these papers that we're going to look at are correct. They're following the rules that they're supposed to be following. But you'll notice that they look totally different because the rules are totally different. So what you're looking at here on the left is the front page of an APA style paper. On the right is an MLA style paper. And you can see there are a lot of crazy differences between these things. Here too, this is the last page, your references page or your works cited page, and the format here is totally different too. Right? So if you look at a couple of these sources, for example, Each of these sources I just highlighted is taking an article from a journal or from a newspaper, and the way those titles are formatted are totally different. Right? For the MLA style one, it's in quotation marks, and it's in what we call title case, meaning every word is capitalized. Over on the references page for the APA style paper, only the first letter is capitalized, no quotation marks. If you're using a web source as another example, the rules are totally different. Again, on the APA style paper, you have to have a URL that says where you found this on the web, and it has to be prefaced with the sentence or with the phrase retrieved from. In MLA style, at least since 2009, all you have to do for MLA these days is just include the word web to indicate that this is a source you found on the web. So these rules are really fiddly, they're very specific, and they tell you how to do pretty much everything. And really, there's a boatload of these things. MLA stands for the Modern Language Association, which is basically the national organization for English nerds. And so it's a citation style that was put together specifically with the goal of being able to talk effectively about books and being able to cite books effectively, including those that have been written hundreds of years ago. But MLA is only one of kind of a crap load. I looked for a list online, and the list that I found had 22 different citation styles for 22 different organizations, and just looking at it, I already identify 2 that were missing, just off the top of my head. So there are lots and lots of these, and they're all different. Some of them are related, some of them are completely separate. And unless you're going to be an English major, the odds are pretty good that you're not going to be using MLA style. At least not for long. You definitely will in this class, you probably will in English too. But as we're approaching this today, try not to think about this as a lesson in MLA style. Instead, try to think about this as a lesson in how to learn how to use a new citation style. These rules are arbitrary and really specific, and they're going to differ from citation style to citation style. So instead of thinking about learning exactly how to do things in MLA style and memorizing each part of that, I want you to think about this as learning the procedure, the kinds of things that you're going to have to look up, figure out, and understand whenever you're presented with a new citation style. Because you'll probably have to use at least 1 or 2 more over the course of your academic career, and then depending on what field you go into, there's probably going to be other formatting rules similar to these that you'll have to pick up on. When we are learning a new citation style, no matter what the citation style, you're probably going to have all 3 of these pieces. These 3 things are things you'll have to think about no matter what style you're using. Your manuscript format, your works cited page, and your in-text citation. Those will be different in sometimes really dramatic ways, but each citation style is probably going to have rules for all of these things. So let's start with your manuscript format. Manuscript format says how to format your pages, right? What the paper should look like on the page. And each format will probably have similar rules about these kinds of things too. The specifics that I'm going to talk about here. So for example, your papers should be, for MLA format, should be double-spaced using 12-point font. MLA format does not specify Times New Roman. However, a lot of instructors I know think that it does. So you should always make sure to check with your instructor for any of these things, because they may have weird and wacky variants that are not actually what is called for in MLA format. Honestly, while I was putting this presentation together, I noticed something that I thought was weird, and I had to double check, and I found out that one of the things that I had thought I was supposed to do for a long time is actually wrong. I think my way is better, but it's not what the MLA standards call for. So your instructors are not going to be perfect on this stuff either, but sometimes they will be both very wrong and very sure of themselves. So you want to make sure that you, if you run into something weird or something where you're not sure what to do, check with your instructor. That said, As a matter of general practice, no matter what citation style, in my experience, double space 12 point Times New Roman is kind of the standard for college papers. If you don't have any other instructions about how to format things, double space 12 point Times New Roman is probably the way to go. Same is true with margins, definitely for MLA style and really in general. There should be 1-inch margins on all sides of your paper. For MLA style, in the upper left-hand corner, you should have my name, your name, the class, and the date. You'll notice that they have a weird format for the date. I think MLA technically says that you're supposed to have it in that format, so date, the month written out, and then all 4 digits of the year. That probably no one cares about. I can't imagine that you're going to have somebody have a teacher, fail you on a paper or something like that because you said March 14th instead of 14 March. But again, these rules are really specific, and so MLA probably does have an exact format that they want that date in. Like I said, different citation styles will do things differently, but you'll probably, for any given citation style, there's probably going to be some kind of heading that goes on the first page that says how you're going to include this kind of information. And then last thing, for the manuscript format, in the upper right-hand corner, you need to have your last name, a space, and the page number. It'll be tempting, like the way that you'll want to do this if you've never done this before is wait until you fill up the first page and then hit enter and then tab over and type in your name and then hit enter a couple of times again. That is really kind of a terrible way to do this because it makes a huge amount of work anytime you want to change anything. The tool in Microsoft Word or whatever program that you're using that'll allow you to do this more easily is called the header. And I'll show you guys how to do that a little bit later on. But the same goes with double spacing. Don't just hit enter twice, right? There are ways that your word processing program can do this for you by magic, and if you allow it to do that for you, you will make your life a lot easier. So if I don't put up a link with this, email me and I'll make sure to point you guys to a video that'll show you how to do that. Okay, so those are the basics of manuscript format. And so the next question is your works cited page. Works cited is what we call in an MLA format, but pretty much every citation style is going to have something like this as well. It may not be called a works cited page, but pretty much every citation style will have a list of your sources where you include all of the major details about the sources that you're using. In MLA, it's called works cited. And your works cited page is always its own page. And the reason it's called a works cited page is because it's supposed to contain an entry for each work that you have cited in your paper. So if you use a source in your paper, there should be something for it on the works cited page. If you don't use a source in your paper, it shouldn't show up on your works cited page. This isn't a bibliography page. It's not a related readings page. This is only a list of the actual sources you use in your paper. And the idea here is that your works cited page is going to allow your readers to track down the exact same thing you're looking at. So if we're using something that has been around for a while, right? So if you were citing, for example, Finnegan's Wake, well, if it's an old book, it's probably run in lots and lots of different versions by several different publishers. And so if you're referring to something that he says on page 46, your page 46 might not be the same as every other page 46. So your citation on your works cited page is going to give not just the fact that this is Finnegan's Wake, but it's going to give the exact edition that you're holding in your hand, so that if somebody needs to see the exact same thing you're looking at, they can track that down. That's part of why these entries are so specific in their formatting, to help them figure out, or to help your readers figure out exactly what you're looking at. The formatting for this page is different and weird too. So let me show you some of the basics. And again, I'll show you later on how to do this stuff in Microsoft Word so that you can know how to manage the weird formatting. First of all, your works cited page should be double spaced, just like everything else in your paper. For some reason, and I did this too when I first started writing MLA papers, for some reason what feels natural is to have an extra space between each entry and then have each entry be single spaced, but that is not how it should work. Everything should be double spaced here. At the top in the middle it should say works cited. Exactly like that, capital W, capital C, the word works, the word cited, not works cited singular or work cite. Not all in lowercase or all in capitals, just works cited. Nothing needs to be bold, italic, or underlined, just works cited. And we'll talk about how to format these entries in a minute, but your works cited page should list each entry alphabetically by whatever comes first. So you'll notice that the first entry here, best off, is a person. The second entry here, Farmers Insurance Group, is an organization. It doesn't matter. F comes after B, and so it goes B and then F, right? Whatever comes first, alphabetized by that. And the weirdest thing probably about your works cited page is the indentation. This uses what's called a hanging indent, and this is really easy to do in Microsoft Word. It'll take a huge amount of effort out of this for you. I think the shortcut is just Control T. But what a hanging indent does is, like with a regular paragraph, the first line of each paragraph is indented, and then everything else is flush with the left margin, right, all the way scooted over to the left. With your works cited page, it's the exact opposite. The first line of each entry gets pushed all the way over to the left, and then everything else in that entry gets indented half an inch. What that does, the reason for that is, so if I'm looking, for example, for that source that you cited by Chan Lo, and all I saw was Lo in the paper, well, if I want to find that source, what I need to do is look at your works cited list and see where that is on the paper. So probably what I'll do is have to scan from top to bottom, looking along the left-hand margin. And so you can see by having each entry have its first line stick out, Chan Lo's name, the name Lo, is much easier to identify than if it were tucked in and everything else were pushed over. All right, so it's easier to find, scanning this list, it's easier to find the name Lo than it is, for example, the word close, which appears in one of these titles. And now we have to watch all this again. Hooray for not editing things. But better this than have to wait 4 weeks while I fiddle around with timings. Okay, so let's look at an example here. This is a citation for a book, Amy Tan's book, The Bone Setter's Daughter, and this is an example of the kind of thing you might find on a works cited page. And like I said, there are rules for everything here. You'll notice that the punctuation is kind of wacky. What goes where doesn't seem to make any sense, and it doesn't make any sense. It's not the sort of thing that you can figure out, but it is the sort of thing that has rules. So the idea with a works cited page is not to memorize all of this stuff, and certainly not to know intuitively what you're supposed to do, right? We shouldn't be able to write these things the same way that we can write sentences, because all of this is arbitrary. There's a system, but there isn't necessarily sense. So here's how you do this for a book, just as an example. The first thing that's there is the author's name, last name, comma, first name, followed by the title of the book. After that, we get the location where the book was published, or rather the location of the publisher, followed by a colon, then the name of the publisher, a comma, and the year of publication, followed by a period. If you learned MLA style more than 4 or 5 years ago, this next part is probably weird. It's probably weird anyway. But the last thing that goes in MLA style citations now is the medium, which is to say how this source was published. So most common for us are probably going to be print and web. But if for some reason you feel like, rolling the clock back to 1998 and using your CD-ROM version of Microsoft Encarta, it might say CD-ROM here, or else DVD, TV, radio, film, right, depending on how this source exists in the world. But like I said, these are not things that you're necessarily supposed to memorize. I can do a book citation off the top of my head because I've been doing this for so long, but I certainly couldn't when I started out. And I certainly could not do, for example, this, which is an example of an article included in an anthology, which was published in multiple editions and which had an editor. Right? So how this information is supposed to go, I'm not going to remember that off the top of my head. And this is a real citation. This is something that I used in a paper in grad school, as is this one. Oh no, I'm sorry. This is one I took as an example because the rules were different when I was doing these. But this is another example of the kind of thing that you will probably use this semester. It's an article that was published originally in a scholarly journal, which is paginated. This one looks like it's by issue, probably. Sometimes the pagination works differently, and there are different rules for that. So sometimes you'll look at an article that's supposed to be like on page 743 of a magazine, and the reason that it is on page 743 of a magazine is that the magazine counts its pages starting back in like 1954 or something like that. But not only was this originally run in a print journal, it was then republished in an academic database, specifically Academic Search Premier, and found via the web. Probably all of you will have something like this that you have to do. And again, the format is nuts. You're not supposed to know this off the top of your head. The idea is that we need to sort of know how these things work and know where to look stuff up. And I'll get to that at the end of this. So that's your works cited page. Like I said, the idea is with your works cited page, it's going to help the person that's reading your paper track down the actual source in the world. So if you're holding a book, they can find that same book that you're holding. If you're watching a DVD and you want to refer to the director's commentary on the movie, they can track down that same DVD and listen to that same director's commentary. That's what the works cited page is all about. The last thing that you're going to need to figure out for any given citation style is the in-text citation. Again, the rules will be different for each citation style, but these three things are all going to be there. Your in-text citation is the stuff that actually happens in your paper, right? Mixed in with your sentences in the paragraphs that you write for your paper. And usually, for MLA style, the basic way to do this is anytime you are using an idea or information from an outside source, or anytime you want to verify information that you are using with an outside source. So even if it's stuff that you already knew, if you want to point to a book or an article that explains that thing that you already knew, really whenever you're connecting a piece of information with an outside source, usually what we do is parentheses and at the end of the sentence, parentheses, the author's name and the page number. So you'll notice on the top example there, it's just Sundin 8. All you need is name, number. There's no abbreviation. You don't need to say page in between. There's no comma. There used to be a comma, and I always liked that comma, but now the comma is gone. Such is the passing of the things we love in life. Okay, that was my weird lapse into citation style melancholy. Anyway, all you need, author's name, page number. And the most important part about that, the reason that I'm emphasizing that so much, is that the point of your in-text citation is not to help your reader find this source. You don't need to include any other information than that. Really, all you need in those parentheses is whatever information your reader needs to look up this source on your Works Cited page. Right? So if Finnegan's Wake is the source that we're talking about, and it's the only book that I'm using by James Joyce, just saying Joyce in that sentence is going to be enough. You can look at my Works Cited page, see Joyce, James, Finnegan's Wake. All right, that's the source that he's talking about. If I have 9 different books by James Joyce, then I might need to do something extra, and conveniently MLA has rules for that too. But I don't need to do everything in these parentheses. All I need to do is help the reader find it on the Works Cited page. The most common way that this goes wrong is I will often see people who will copy and paste the whole long web address from a source that they're using into those parentheses. And so what ends up happening is in the middle of a paragraph, often a paragraph that I'm very interested in, all of a sudden there are 9 lines of blue gibberish from where they pasted that web address. And especially when they're including 9 lines of blue gibberish in a paper they have printed out, I can't even click on that link. I tap on the paper, it does nothing. So all that really does is distract your reader. That information isn't necessary there. If it is necessary at all, it should go on that Works Cited list at the end so that it's not interfering with your ideas. So the in-text citation, the idea is give your reader as little as you can, as long as that is enough to help them figure out where on your Works Cited list to find this source. That's what the first part of that is for, the author's name, to help them find it on the Works Cited list. The page number, the idea is to help them find this information within that source. So they go to the Works Cited page, they find the exact same edition of Finnegan's Wake that I'm using, and they look on page 49 and they see that exact quote. So here's an example. As I talked about before, whether or not I knew this when I started writing doesn't really matter. But if I say the first town to restrict the use of handheld phones was Brooklyn, Ohio, whether or not I knew that, probably not everybody knows that. This isn't really common knowledge. We don't know that the first town to restrict use of handheld phones was Brooklyn, Ohio, in the same way that we know that the sky is blue or that Barack Obama is president. So because this is something that our readers might not know, even if we didn't have to look it up ourselves, we probably still want to look it up just so that we can verify if this fact is important enough to include in our paper. We want our readers to know that it's true. So an in-text citation is probably necessary here to show readers where this comes from. So the easiest way to do that is author's name, page number in parentheses at the end. The easiest way, but not necessarily the best way. This says, look on my Works Cited page for a source by someone called Leighton, go track down that source, and given the weird page number C9, this is almost certainly coming from a newspaper. But so if you go to the office of whatever newspaper it is and ask for a back issue and they fish it out for you, and you're holding the newspaper, you can look on page C9 and you will find this piece of information. But this is the easiest way to do it probably, but it's not the best way to do it. And often if we're talking about a source that is important, or if we're wanting to respond in more depth to what a writer has to say, we might want to actually talk about the writer a little bit. The information may not be the only important thing about this piece of information. So another thing that we can do, MLA gives us some other options for this. And when it's possible, it's usually best to do it this way. Instead of, rewind in your head and pretend that you had seen that when I was talking about what went in those parentheses. Anyway, now it's old hat for you. But the other way of doing things. What we can do is instead of including the author's name in parentheses at the end, we can incorporate that into our sentence. So, for example, we might change it to say, according to Leighton, the first town to restrict use of handheld phones was Brooklyn, Ohio. If we do that, we've got the author's name right there in the sentence. Because we have it in the sentence, the reader is going to know what they need to be looking for on the Works Cited page. And all that we need there at the end is the page number in parentheses. This is perfectly acceptable according to MLA style too, and it allows you to include the author in the paragraph rather than just sticking them in parentheses. So for example, if we're wanting to talk about Barbara Ehrenreich, for example, hypothetically, it would give us the chance to say who Barbara Ehrenreich is, what she's doing in this book, to talk about those things in our paragraph rather than just have to have her sort of shuffled off into the parentheses at the end. And no matter which form we're using, the author in parentheses or the author in the sentence, either way, the fundamental idea is that because we're using that citation there, that means if I look on the Works Cited page, I'm going to find that source by Leighton that I can go track down the actual newspaper from. So, where can we look to look this stuff up? I'll give you a quick tour of the websites so that you can sort of see how to look some of this stuff up. But the recommended text for our class, Diana Hacker's Pocket Style Manual, is a great thing to have in front of you. It's going to have all the reference material you need so that you can look this stuff up and not have to memorize it. The reason it's a recommended text is she also has a great website, and I've linked to that website from our website. So as I mentioned before, as soon as I can, I'm going to post a series of small videos showing you a couple of the tricks with Microsoft Word to accomplish the various peculiarities of MLA style. So keep an eye out for that. I'll also show you around Diana Hacker's website in one of those videos so you can see how to use the online resource for the citation reference. Good luck.